All right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want to remind you to like and subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on YouTube. We want to get up to 500 likes on this show. And remember, we need an army with us for each and every show here on Inside College Basketball Now, and we need you to be all you can be. And also a special programming note. On Mondays and Thursdays during the 25-26 college basketball season, Inside College Basketball Now will be coming to you with live shows at 1 o'clock Eastern. And if you can't get with us at 1 o'clock Eastern on Mondays and Thursdays, be sure to reconnect via Spotify, via Apple on your commute home or during your early morning workout. And also want to make a special announcement that moving forward, every Monday for the rest of the 25-26 college basketball season, Inside College Basketball Now will be right here on CBS Sports Network at 1 o'clock Eastern. And in addition to those shows every Monday and Thursday, Inside College Basketball Now will be coming to you with additional episodes each and every week with some of the biggest and best names in the sport for exclusive interviews. Rick Pitino from St. John's joined me earlier this week. You can check out that interview in its entirety on both Apple and Spotify. And coming up Friday morning, Miami of Ohio head coach Travis Steele will be my guest on Inside College Basketball Now. That will drop at 8 a.m. Eastern on YouTube. The Red Hawks off to a 23-0 start entering Saturday's game against Marshall. It is a massive weekend in college basketball, and obviously we know now that we are in February, and after February comes March, and that is why, with great enthusiasm, we start today's show with three big things. And the first big thing is rather simple for me because it centers around, to me, the most anticipated game that we are going to have in the regular season during the 25-26 season, and that is Friday's game between UConn and St. John's at the world's most famous arena. Now, I have been talking to you in this very seat since last summer about how UConn and St. John's is the burgeoning rivalry in the sport. And I have looked forward to Friday for months. I have looked forward to the fact that these two teams would again be nationally relevant at the highest level of college basketball. UConn has 100% lived up to its end of the bargain. St. John's, for the start of the season, did not. But recently, we have seen the Red Storm turn a corner. Recently, we have seen moments of promise from Rick Pitino's team. And Friday night at Madison Square Garden, UConn will enter this game on an 18-game winning streak, poised to challenge for a third national title in 4 years under Dan Hurley. And St. John's will enter this game on an 8-game winning streak. It is the most anticipated regular season game that we have in the 25-26 regular season for college basketball. Now, with that said, the game in a couple of weeks in Connecticut is also going to be one to obviously lock in on. But I will say this. The venue has a lot to do with it. The venue changes everything. And I know that can sound like a very, very proud New Yorker when I say it, but I mean it. Billy Joel played one arena for his entire career when he was in a situation for playing the concert at Madison Square Garden. One arena. Meanwhile, WrestleMania in 1985, when it was launched, was at one arena. It was at Madison Square Garden. So when we look ahead to Friday and we look ahead to this matchup, the one thing we have to remember is this. It is going to come down, in my opinion, to whether or not UConn can keep its big man, Tarris Reed, on the floor. Now, when Tarris Reed has been able to stay on the floor for Connecticut this season, Tarris Reed has looked like an all-American caliber big man. And I went over the numbers before I got on the air. In games this season, when Tarris Reed plays 30 or more minutes for UConn, he's averaging 16.5 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 2.3 blocks. Those are all American caliber numbers. St. John's has the size and the strength with Bryce Hopkins, with Zuby Ejiofor, to get Reed in the foul trouble. The question is, will they be able to do that and be able to get into UConn's bench? Another big thing to keep an eye on, the play at the point of attack. And that's directly correlated to what has been St. John's Achilles heel all season, and that's the lack of a traditional point guard. Now, Dylan Mitchell has excelled as a point forward under Rick Pitino this season in a role very similar to what I saw from Andre Jackson at UConn during the 22-23 season when Dan Hurley led the Huskies to their first national championship. With that said, the guy that is starting to separate himself for UConn in the Big East Player of the Year race, because the Huskies have such a balanced team. One night it can be Solo Ball, another it can be Tarris Reed. Alex Caraban's obviously been around for 17 years. You can say the same thing about Braylon Mullins, who, again, is a ridiculous offensive talent. But to me, Silas Demery Jr., the transfer from Georgia, is now starting to blossom in the mold of a player that could win the Big East Player of the Year award. And look, there's always the question of whether or not a transfer is going to be able to adapt right away. The guy that Dan Hurley saw when he recruited Demery was Tristan Newton, who was the most outstanding player 2 years ago on the UConn team that won the 2024 national championship. Demery is ahead of where Newton was in his first year in the program. And Demery, over his last 5 games, has been surgical running the Huskies offense. His assist-to-turnover ratio in the last 5 games is 31-8. That's almost 4-1 for you, those of you who are keeping score at home. And UConn's offense has been surgical. 26 assists on 34 made field goals against Xavier. And UConn, over the last 2 games, the last 80 minutes, UConn has made its road trip to Omaha to play Creighton and its game earlier this week against Xavier at home look like bye games in the Big East. And that brings me now to the bigger picture and why this game is so important for both sides, but especially for UConn. If you are Dan Hurley and UConn, you are not just chasing, obviously, a Big East regular season title. You are trying to put yourself in the best situation to be a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament on Selection Sunday and have the best path back to a Final Four. That means stacking as many signature wins as possible. Those don't exist right now in high volume in the Big East. The Big East is trending towards being a 3-bid league on Selection Sunday with UConn, St. John's, and Villanova. So not only is this a rivalry game, not only is this a game that is going to have Dan Hurley on one side and Rick Pitino on the other side, 2 of the 3 coaches, Bill Self being the other, that are active in college basketball that have won multiple national championships, but this is also a major opportunity for UConn to grab a quad 1 win. And here's the bottom line. When you are in an 11-team league and you only have 3 teams looking cemented for the NCAA tournament, you have a lot of landmines to navigate. Games that can hurt your resume, but really don't help your resume. This is not one of those games for UConn. UConn has an opportunity to bolster its 1-seed resume with a victory over St. John's. And there's so many things here in play. And there's so many different dynamics between both coaching staffs and the fact that last year, St. John's, for the first time in a long time, beat UConn not once, but twice in the same season. And look, when I talked about this 12 months ago, I was very open about the fact that for a rivalry to exist, it can't be one-sided. For a rivalry to exist, it can't constantly be the bully putting the little kid in a locker. That changed last season when St. John's went up to UConn, won at Gamble Pavilion, won decisively at Madison Square Garden, won the Big East regular season title for the first time in 25 years, and also won the Big East tournament title. The Big East regular season title St. John's won for the first time in 40 years, the Big East tournament title for the first time in 20 years. Now, with that said, this is also a game where both sides are not going to get together for drinks afterwards. And anytime in sports you have a rivalry, it is better when things are hostile. It is better when things get feisty. And that's what we have in store for us on Friday night at Madison Square Garden. I will be on the call for this game on the national radio feed for Compass Media Networks. I'm doing color. I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I'm juiced up. And again, I get why people may say, well, there have been other games in college basketball that could be just as entertaining. Duke's going to play Michigan in February. Last week at Allen Fieldhouse, we had Darren Peterson against A.J. DeBanza. Those games weren't played at Madison Square Garden. Those games did not feature the last two winners of the Naismith Coach of the Year Award. Those games did not feature two programs built in the Northeast that are trying to be in a situation where they can put themselves again in a scenario where they can play deep into the NCAA tournament. St. John's is in a unique spot because St. John's, for the better part of 25 years, there were pockets of success, obviously, under Steve Lavin. They made the tournament once under Chris Mullen. But St. John's fans right now are riding a magic carpet ride under Rick Pitino. Because at 73 years old, you heard him on this podcast earlier in the week. He says he doesn't know how much longer he's going to coach. Rick Pitino, in my opinion, as long as he is physically able to do so, will be coaching at St. John's. But this is not the norm for a St. John's program that was always in the basement of the sport for the last 25 years. The most meaningful college game of the weekend your team is playing in. And the most meaningful college game and the most anticipated game of the 25-26 season will be Friday night at Madison Square Garden. Keys to the game are simple. How much can Silas Demery continue to control things for UConn? Can St. John's up front with Hopkins, with Prey, with Ejiofor get Tarris Reed out of the game? And will St. John's defensively, which is what Rick Pitino said earlier this week when we had him on, can St. John's defensively distort what UConn is doing on offense? Because UConn has been surgical in its last two games against Xavier and Creighton. But you know as well as I do, the weight class is going to reach a different level. St. John's is clearly the second best team in the Big East. Now, I know that's not the biggest accolade you can get when you only have three teams going to the NCAA tournament, but this is the game that people everywhere who have been immersed in college basketball have looked at. And it's a game, again, that is right on the horizon, just 25 blocks south of where I'm sitting right now, Friday night at Madison Square Garden. Keep in mind this, too. St. John's only has one loss in the Big East. UConn is obviously undefeated. But a win by the Red Storm would then give St. John's the inside track to winning yet another Big East regular season title under Rick Pitino. But St. John's has to beat UConn first. And right now, in the last two games that UConn has played, UConn has made Big East regular season games look like bye games. Huskies are clicking on all cylinders. 18-game winning streak entering Friday night, but the Red Storm with an 8-game winning streak of their own. One team that is not on a winning streak, one team that is dealing with all sorts of adversity for the first time is BYU. The Cougars gave up 99 points on Wednesday night in a loss to Oklahoma State. What is the 4-1-1 on BYU, and can the Cougars snap out of it? BYU is going to take on Houston on Saturday night in Provo. I will get into all that and more when we return. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Inside College Basketball Now with Jon Rothstein here on CBS Sports Network. The second big thing I want to get into is the fact that adversity has hit BYU. Now, I went to Provo in the preseason, spent the day at BYU, watched practice, got obviously the lay of the land for this season because I felt it was really important to have boots on the ground in Provo, thinking about what lies ahead this season with BYU getting Rob Wright out of the transfer portal, with BYU retaining Richie Saunders, with BYU obviously getting a commitment from A.J. DeBansa, who's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 picks in the 2026 NBA draft. And as I talked about when I did show after show here during the offseason, this was, in my opinion, the most anticipated season in the history of BYU's program, simply because of the fact we didn't know when, again, BYU would have this type of talent in its basketball program. Now, when I went to practice in Provo, the biggest thing I took away after watching practice was I did not know if BYU had enough depth and enough options outside of its primary guys. And I think now what we're seeing is that come to fruition. BYU's big three, Wright, Saunders, and DeBansa, combined for 71 of its 92 points last night in a loss at Oklahoma State, who's a very, very potent offensive team under Steve Lutz. And with the win last night in Stillwater, is starting to play its way now into the NCAA tournament bubble picture. It was a big win for them. Oklahoma State's also beaten Texas A&M and UCF this year. But I think we're seeing now a recurring theme. And BYU, to its credit, played a very difficult non-conference schedule. Went to Boston to play UConn. Played that game without Kennard Davis, and also Keba Keita got injured in that game, but made a big second-half comeback in that game. Beat Wisconsin in Salt Lake. Came back to beat Clemson at Madison Square Garden. But now that we are in the guts of Big 12 play, it's pretty clear to me that BYU's defensive ability is not where it needs to be to compete with the top teams in the league. And also BYU's depth around its big three of Wright, DeBansa, and Saunders is not up to par with the other teams in the conference. BYU, in losses in Big 12 play, at Texas Tech, at Kansas, and at home against Arizona, is giving up over 88 points per game. And again, BYU gave up 99 in Stillwater last night against Oklahoma State. So, for the first time this season, there's major adversity in Provo. For the first time this season, we have BYU at a little bit of a crossroads. And it's not going to get any easier. As you can see the schedule right there, Houston, the bully of the conference, the team that has obviously dominated the league since it came over from the American Conference under Kelvin Sampson, is now coming to Provo on Saturday. It gets a little bit easier, but not too much easier when you have at Baylor and Colorado. Then there's at Arizona on February 18th and a home game against Iowa State on the 21st. Now, one good thing when you look at the remaining schedule for BYU is BYU, other than a trip to Arizona, Houston, Iowa State, and Texas Tech all come to Provo. So that is a positive. Now, you're going to obviously have to beat some of the best teams in the country, but only one more time will you be in a situation where you're going on an opponent's home floor. But here's the bottom line when it comes to BYU. We have now a scenario where the stars on this team are getting their fill. The stars on this team are producing. As I mentioned, Wright, DeBansa, and Saunders combined for 71. So Saunders combined for 71 of the team's 92 points against Oklahoma State. But you're starting to question a little bit how much this collection of players is going to be able to stop the truly elite teams. And that's directly related to Houston. And to me, Saturday night in Provo, 10:30 Eastern start, is a crossroads game for BYU. Because coming into the season, and I still believe it, based on sheer talent, not necessarily based on the team that was assembled, because you don't know in this climate until you see it come out in the wash. Based on sheer talent, to me, this felt like BYU's best chance to get to a Final Four. It's something that the BYU fan should be dreaming of when you get this type of talent. But so far, we have not seen BYU in a situation where it has performed and traded blows with a team that obviously is also mentioned with being the best team in the country. Played admirably against UConn. UConn got off to a big lead. BYU came back. Same thing against Arizona. Was right there with Texas Tech. Texas Tech, in my opinion, broke the game open late, and we know what last Saturday was against Kansas. Very similar to the UConn game and the Arizona game. Now, I think this. after being in Provo during the preseason. I think some season-ending injuries have snapped BYU's options on offense, and it's not getting enough attention. Dawson Baker, a spot-up shooter who obviously maybe not a lot of people know about, but could obviously open up the floor a little bit with his shot making. Losing him for the season to me was a big-time loss for BYU. He was a shot maker. He could open things up for Saunders, open things up for DeBonsa. And now, when you're looking at where this team goes when it goes to its bench, to me there is a major drop-off compared to other teams and what we're seeing in the Big 12 at the top. And Saturday, you have Houston. Saturday, you have a Houston team that, in my opinion, isn't just, I would say, off the radar, but it feels like because there are so many other storylines in the conference this year, what's going on with Darren Peterson, what's going on with Arizona, Houston, the program that has been a 1 seed in each of the last 3 NCAA tournaments, is not maybe getting the proper attention it deserves. But this is a fantastic matchup on Saturday, which again is going to feature elite games all over the sport. I'm going to get into our next segment into what's going on in the Big Ten. But obviously, we have Carolina and Duke. That's going to be obviously on Saturday. There's other big games I'm going to preview as well as we continue to march on. And I want to say this about the Carolina-Duke thing. I know that it's going to be fascinating to watch Wilson go against Boozer, and I know it's going to be fascinating to see if the Tar Heels can take that much of a step. I am curious to see in that game how Derek Dixon, North Carolina's freshman point guard who has moved into the starting lineup, and the Tar Heels have rolled off a winning streak since coming back from Northern California and losing to Stanford and Cal. I am curious to see how Derek Dixon does in that type of environment. Reminds me a little bit, and this is years ago, reminds me of when Roy Williams was using Larry Drew as his point guard. I believe it was the 10-11 season. Larry Drew wound up leaving North Carolina, transferring to UCLA, where he had a great senior year under Ben Howland. UCLA won the Pac-12 that year. But Larry Drew stepped away from the team. Kendall Marshall took over, ran away with things at the point guard spot, and then never looked back. That is what I'm seeing a little bit with Derek Dixon. Not that Derek Dixon is the same player as Kendall Marshall. This guy is not built in that breakneck point guard mold where he has great speed and shiftiness. He's slow. He's methodical. He's got great size. He can see over defenses, but he will be stepping up a weight class against, obviously, a team in Duke that right now is in position to be a number 1 seed again in the NCAA tournament, and also has 1 loss this season at the Garden to Texas Tech, a game which Duke led by a large margin before the Red Raiders came back and got the victory. So there's a lot of big games coming up on Saturday. Obviously, the matchup between Houston and BYU, Carolina, Duke at the top. Now, there is another big game on Saturday night, and it's 2 teams in the Big Ten kind of that are going in 2 different directions. Michigan State was the victim of an upset loss last night against Minnesota at the Barn, and Illinois dominated Northwestern, beat the Wildcats by 40 points in Champaign. Those 2 teams are going to hook up Saturday night in East Lansing. What has gotten into Illinois, and what has gotten into Michigan State? I'll take a look at the Big Ten when we return. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. All right, Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. The third big thing I want to get to today, it's real simple. Illinois is playing some of the best basketball in the country. The Illini won their 12th straight game on Wednesday night against Northwestern, a game that the Illini won by 40 points, but the offense for Illinois was ridiculous. 17 made three-point shots, 20 assists on 28 made field goals. Part of eventually getting to a Final Four is if you are in position year after year to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, sooner or later as a program, you're going to break through. Illinois, to me, feels like the type of team this year that could finally find a seam and find the Final Four as obviously a place where it lands. Now, Illinois has not been to the Final Four since that 2005 team with Darren Williams, Luther Head, Dee Brown. Illinois also went in 1989 when Michigan beat Seton Hall. But Illinois, to me, is playing some of the best basketball in the sport and is right now in position with Michigan at the top of the Big Ten standings. Now, this is what I'll say for the people who aren't as familiar with Illinois. Illinois right now is playing without Kylan Boswell, one of its best players, best perimeter defenders, one of the best perimeter defenders in the country. But it has not inhibited this team from dominating its opponents. As I said, Illinois has won 12 games in a row. Now, the thing that makes this team such a difficult team to match up with is the fact that the Illini can get great shooting and great offense from all 5 spots on the floor. Obviously, Keaton Wagler, who has been pretty much at the vernacular of the sport the last couple of weeks, especially after his 46-point performance at Mackey Arena against Purdue a couple of weeks ago. He has been electric. He's playing like a first-team All-American. He's playing like the Big Ten Player of the Year. But beyond that, there are pieces around him that cannot allow you to double team and can go over the top of the defense. Last night, David Mirkovic, Ben Humrickhouse, and Zvonimir Ivasic, 3 front court players for this team, guys who play up front, all made a minimum of 3 threes in the game. That is unheard of when you're talking about a front court that can go over the top of the defense. Jake Davis, who has filled in for Kai Boswell since Kai Boswell went out with a hand injury, has emerged as one of the top glue guys in college basketball. And again, you think about where this program has been under Brad Underwood. 2021, Big Ten tournament title, 1 seed in the NCAA tournament in the bubble, came up short against Loyola Chicago in the round of 32. 2022, very high seed again in the NCAA tournament, won a share of the Big Ten regular season title, lose to Houston. 2023, lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament to Arkansas. 2024, Elite Eight loss to the UConn team in Boston that won a national championship, and then last year lost to Kentucky in the round of 32. So if we're looking at things over the last half decade, Illinois has been in position multiple times to make deep runs in the NCAA tournament. Illinois went to the Elite Eight, as I mentioned, in 2024, but this team now is playing like a team that is going to be firmly in the mix for a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And here's a big thing I want to point out. Illinois and its path to winning a Big Ten regular season title is slightly easier as of now than Michigan's. Illinois, when you look at the schedule, this is what we have. They're going to be at Michigan State on Saturday night. You have 2 home games against Wisconsin, Indiana. There's a West Coast trip to play SC and UCLA, who are in the bracket as of today. You come back to take on Michigan and Oregon, and then you finish at Maryland, who's obviously one of the worst power conference teams in the sport. Michigan, meanwhile, has to go and play on the road at Illinois and also still has to go to Mackey Arena to take on Purdue. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this thing plays out, especially when Illinois gets Kai Boswell back in the lineup. But Illinois' pieces right now fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. Illini got a really good game last night as well from Andrei Stojakovic, who, in my opinion, when he plays well, Illinois goes to a different level. But the shooting that this team has from all areas of the court separated, in my opinion. Now, 2 other teams in the Midwest I want to give shout-outs to. One is St. Louis, who's 22-1 under Josh Schertz. He's coaching the best team that the Atlantic 10 has seen since Dayton went 29-2 prior to COVID shutting down the 2020 NCAA tournament. One thing that people are not talking about enough, in my opinion, St. Louis is 22-1, but St. Louis also, in its one loss, suffered a defeat to Stanford in Palm Springs on a fluke play that wound up with Stanford guard Benny Gieler making a 3 with just seconds to play. Had that shot not gone in, and St. Louis was still undefeated, we would be talking about St. Louis in the same light that we talked about Wichita State when Greg Marshall's team went into the NCAA tournament undefeated at 34-0 in 13-14 and wound up losing to Kentucky in the round of 32. Also, and I know I mentioned that he's going to be on Inside College Basketball Now on Friday, want to salute Miami, Ohio's Travis Steele, who has led the Red Hawks to a 23-0 record. Now, here's one thing you have to look at for both St. Louis and Miami of Ohio. These are two mid-majors who are having seasons to remember. As I mentioned, St. Louis is a fluke finish against Stanford away from being in the same light as Wichita State from 2014. Miami, Ohio is 23-0, having a season to remember. The pressure, though, on these two teams to keep winning is immense because the competition they're going against are nowhere near the at-large picture for the NCAA tournament. To St. Louis's credit, Josh Schertz has built one of the best mid-major teams in the country. They've got shooting with Trey Green and Ishan Sharma, also St. John's transfer Brady Dunlap. They've got great defense with Amari McCoughtry. Robbie Avila is obviously an A10 version of Nikola Jokic. But the margin for error is very slim when you talk about the NCAA tournament if St. Louis was to drop a couple of games in a row. Because at the end of the day, these programs and these conferences are not able, at least not right now, to get the type of games that move the needle when you look at an at-large resume. And that is what Josh Schertz dealt with 2 years ago at Indiana State, where he had a great team, won a ton of games, but did not have the teeth on the resume to get an at-large berth. And it's probably even more magnified when you look at Miami, Ohio, who plays in the Mid-American Conference and will play at Marshall on Saturday in a very difficult game. Miami, Ohio has won 7 of its 23 games by 5 points or fewer or in overtime. But you have to really think, up until a certain point, Miami is going to have to win the MAC tournament championship in Cleveland to make the NCAA tournament. If Miami has a perfect regular season and is 31-0 and lost in the championship game, or if Miami was 30-1 and lost in the championship game, it would be very, very close. But given the fact that Miami has a very, very lean resume and it's stacked with quad 3 and 4 wins, it would be a really, really tense time for anybody associated with that Miami program if the Red Hawks were to lose a couple of games before they get to Cleveland for the MAC Conference tournament. As we do every Thursday here on Inside College Basketball Now, I am going to rank certain things in a different category form. Which 5 programs are going through it right now in college basketball? I'll break that down when we return. Jon Rothstein here at Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Inside College Basketball Now with Jon Rothstein here on CBS Sports Network. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We have the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want to remind you to like and subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on YouTube. We want to get up to 500 likes on the show, and we need an army with us each and every show here on Inside College Basketball Now, and we need you to be all you can be. And also a programming note, every Monday and Thursday during the 25-26 college basketball season, we will be coming to you with exclusive episodes at 1 Eastern on Mondays and Thursdays. And every Monday for the rest of the 25-26 college basketball season, here on CBS Sports Network, there will be a live edition of Inside College Basketball Now, and we will also be bringing you exclusive interviews with some of the biggest and best names in the sport. Coming up Friday, I talked to Miami, Ohio head coach Travis Steele, whose team's 23-0, and earlier this week, I caught up with St. John's head coach Rick Pitino ahead of the Red Storm's massive game tomorrow night against UConn at Madison Square Garden. Now, for this week's Rothstein Rankings, I'm going to look at 5 programs who are going through it in college basketball. We start at number 5 with Syracuse. Syracuse has not been in the NCAA tournament since 2021. It is now in a situation where it doesn't look like it's going to be near the bubble. Red Autry is in year 3. He obviously had a very good first year, even though Syracuse didn't make the tournament. But Syracuse, again, looking like it's headed towards another season without an NCAA tournament berth. The Orange obviously were in a scenario where they were down by a lot the other night against North Carolina. Fought back, credit to them for making it respectable, but still not looking like an NCAA tournament team in year 3 under Red Autry. Number 4, Kansas State, who is 10-12 overall and 1-8 in Big 12 play. Kansas State is a program under Jerome Tang. Remember, they went to the Elite Eight in his first year as head coach, lost to Florida Atlantic in 2023. 2024, lost Naquan Tomlin in the middle of the season, which really was hard for that team's chemistry because that team was probably an NCAA tournament team in that season in 2024. Last year got Coleman Hawkins out of the transfer portal. This year got PJ Haggerty out of the transfer portal. But where things are headed right now, it does not look like Kansas State will be in the NCAA tournament this season. Number 3, Loyola Chicago. Now, this to me is one of the more shocking results that we have seen, considering where I thought Loyola Chicago was going to be before the season, and that's at the top of the Atlantic 10. Loyola Chicago is 6-18 this season, 2-9 in Atlantic 10 play. Coming into the season, there was a belief that this would be one of the best non-power conference teams in the sport. Retained Miles Rubin up front, was getting Justin Moore back from an injury. Loyola Chicago, though, has been a massive disappointment this season in the Atlantic 10. Number 2, Maryland. It's year 1 under Bus Williams. I know the Terps have had all sorts of injuries this year, players in and out of the lineup, a brand new roster, but you are what your record says you are. Maryland's 8-13 overall, 1-9 in Big Ten play. Buzz Williams, to his credit, has been a master program builder. Did it at Marquette, did it at Virginia Tech, did it at Texas A&M. I know that this obviously looks very, very bleak right now. There's not a lot of people going to the games, but Buzz Williams has a track record, especially at his last 2 jobs, of starting out slow and then building a consistent NCAA tournament product. I expect Maryland to retain some players that are currently in the program. They already obviously have certain top-tier recruits coming in, but this has been a difficult season in College Park. And number 1, you have to go to Milwaukee, and you have to look at Marquette. Shaka Smart, in his first 4 years at Marquette, had the Golden Eagles in the NCAA tournament, which included a Sweet 16 appearance in 2024. Marquette right now, 8-15 overall, 0-8 in road games, and now we're in a scenario where Marquette is going to have to obviously be looking at the offseason and deciding its next course of action in terms of how it's going to build the program. Shaka Smart, since he got things on solid footing at Marquette, has always been somebody who did not turn to the transfer portal to build a program. Now, he started out that way. He started out that way by getting Tyler Kolek, Olivier Maxence Prosper, guys like that who were part of that nucleus that got things going for him in Milwaukee. The last couple of years, because of the players he's had in the program, he has not went to the transfer portal. It will be interesting to see if his mindset is different moving forward after having a season like he's having right now in Milwaukee, which is unequivocally one of the toughest of his head coaching career. We'll put a bow on this show when we return. I'm going to give you some nuggets and some news and notes from around the world of college basketball, and also look at what games are on the horizon this weekend. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Inside College Basketball Now with Jon Rothstein here on CBS Sports Network. Let's put a bow on this show as we get you set for the weekend in college hoops. Let's go with some 3 good nuggets right now. Nugget number 1, Quadir's quest. I'm talking about NC State guard Quadir Copeland. Copeland the other night against SMU had a ridiculous line. 16 assists and 0 turnovers. He's had 44 turnovers in his last 4 games. Will Wade has turned this guy into one of the best table setters in the ACC. NC State now has wins at SMU, wins at Clemson, and looks like it is comfortably in the NCAA tournament, barring a massive collapse in year 1 under Will Wade. Nugget number 2, give JP the key. Since Rick Barnes put 6'11 forward JP Estrella into the starting lineup for Tennessee, the Vols have taken off. Tennessee is 4-0 since that move, and Estrella during the winning streak is averaging 10.8 points per game and 6.3 rebounds per game. Tennessee not getting major attention right now in the SEC, but the Vols, again, always difficult under Rick Barnes to play against. Plus, you add in the fact that they have Nate Ament, who's playing great basketball, the talented freshman, and also Jacoby Gillespie, a point guard who took Maryland to the Sweet 16 last year. Tennessee could be a sleeper team in the NCAA tournament. Nugget number 3, sour orange. I'm talking about Syracuse again. I went over the numbers, and I looked at Syracuse since it went to the ACC. And in ACC regular season games over the last 12 and a half years, Syracuse, as you can see right there, is just over 50% in terms of a winning percentage. If you look at the Orange's winning percentage in their last 12 years of the old Big East, Syracuse right about 67%. So joining the ACC has not been a major positive for Syracuse's basketball program. And remember this, when Syracuse did make big runs in the NCAA tournament as a member of the ACC, like going to the Final Four in 2016, like going to the Sweet 16 in 2018, like going to the Sweet 16 in 2021. All 3 of those runs came as double-digit seeds in the NCAA tournament. Let's get to some games to watch right now. 5 games to watch this weekend. Obviously, it starts and ends Friday night at Madison Square Garden. UConn and St. John's, the most anticipated game that we have in the regular season for this 25-26 campaign. The classic rivalry game Saturday night in Chapel Hill, Duke against Carolina. Cam Boozer on one side, Caleb Wilson on the other. Illinois, 12-game winning streak, will be in East Lansing to take on Michigan State, who has lost 2 games in a row. Florida and Texas A&M, Saturday night in College Station. Texas A&M I watched last night against Alabama, playing a great brand of basketball under Bucky McMillan. And then a big one in Provo Saturday night, Houston at BYU. A little bit of a crossroads right now for the Cougars. 5 under-the-radar games I'm also tracking this weekend. In Bloomington, Wisconsin travels to take on Indiana. Indiana was very impressive on the road at UCLA and USC. Won the game in Pauley Pavilion, lost the game at the Galen Center. Great shooting on this team with Nick Dorn, Lamar Wilkerson. Really solid team under Darren DeVries. Alabama at Auburn, that's a big one in the SEC. Then a tricky game for Miami at Marshall, part of that MAC Sunbelt Challenge coming up on Saturday afternoon. Remember, Miami has won 7 of its 23 games this year by 5 points or fewer. Then Sunday on CBS, Michigan is at Ohio State. Ohio State will play Maryland tonight. A little bit of a trap game that the Buckeyes can't overlook. And then also on Sunday, Texas Tech will be at West Virginia. Texas Tech coming off a loss Monday at home against Kansas. Christian Anderson did not play in that game for the Red Raiders, but a game that Texas Tech had great control of, but was obviously a team that fell victim to the greatness of Darren Peterson down the stretch. And look, Kansas has been up and down. Kansas has been a team that obviously has been sporadic, but Kansas has a player in Darren Peterson that has a ceiling that usurps any other player in college basketball. And we're seeing more and more with those role guys starting to come around. This is one of the better coaching jobs that Bill Self, who's already a Hall of Famer, has done in his coaching career. Want to remind you that an exclusive chat with Miami, Ohio's Travis Steele will be hitting YouTube at 8 a.m. Eastern on Friday. And remember, we will be with you every Monday and Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern. And every Monday moving forward, we will be right here at 1 o'clock Eastern on CBS Sports Network. I'm Jon Rothstein, and this was Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network.